Hello everyone, welcome to class. Welcome to Inter Korea relationship class. Today I want to talk about South Korean economic growth. Last time we talked about South Korean politics, right? So we talked about Park Chung-hee and we talked about how Park Chung-hee came to power. So I explained that Park Chung-hee came to power um, throughout the coup d'état. He was very successful in coup d'état and he started to KCIA and he gave a oppression to the opposition. So we have talked about political side, and then today we have to cover economic side. The last time we talked about North Korean economy, right? So we talked about like how North Korea at first could successfully achieve economic growth. Then let's start. Let's start economic growth. First of all, I wanted to show this graph. I want to show this graph because of the similarity when the South Korea and Ghana started. When South Korea Ghana started, the GDP per capita was very similar to each other. As you can see, it was $490, and then as you can see, there's huge difference between Ghana and South Korea. In South Korea, it reached to 27, about 27, more than 27, about like $28,000 GDP per capita, while the Ghana is still less than $2,000. That's a lot difference between the two. And then we have to see why that happened. I mean, with South Korea, we have a nickname. So economic growth have a nickname that Han River Miracle. So this is actually miracle, right? It's a very rare case in the world, and then we have to see why that happened. How could it happen? And this is growth rate. As you can see, the growth rate. If you look at the number, it's amazing number. So mostly we had a economic growth more than like 5%, right? Most of time, but there was two economic downturn. One was 1980 was minus 2, and then 1997 we had an economic crisis. It was a minus 5%. Except for that, we had an economic downturn in 1980 because of oil crisis in 1979. Because of that, we had an economic downturn. But other than that, we had more than like 5% most of time, sometimes 16% or 15%. That's actually an amazing number of growth rate. It happened from 1960 to 1970 during the Park Chung-hee's regime. So that's what we will do. What was his magic to do so? Firstly, the most important economic policy was export-oriented policy. So export-oriented policy means when we produce product, it's not for domestic consume. This is for the export use. So that we call this 수출 주도 정책 in Korean. And why did we do that? It's because we have to make money. Uh, South Korea started with light industry. This book, the Victor Cha's book, actually pointed out that South Korea didn't have a lot of natural resources. So that's why we only had a cheap labor. And cheap labor, because of the cheap labor, we could only start with light industry. So this is very different from North Korea. So North Korea started to heavy industry based on what they have. They have natural resources, and then they started to Cholima movement. And Cholima movement is not focusing on light industry. They focus on heavy iron, steel kind of industries. But South Korea didn't have that skills and money. They do not have anything. So at the time, so we started to be the cheap labor. So we started to make plywood. So you can see this picture right here. And this is the radio and wick. So that was their main product to export. And we also export textiles. So these days, the wick, radio, textile kind of things, the China started to the light industry, and then the older industry went to China. But right now, like Vietnam or Turkey or Bangladesh, these countries started to produce this light industry. So, I mean, things has been changed a lot over time. We call this state-led development. In other words, we call this development state. So why did we call state-led development? It's because the Westerners believes that economic growth for economic growth, the most important players is business. So business started to have to invest, and they have to come up with idea kind of thing. So Westerners actually believed in invisible hand, but South Koreans we didn't believe in invisible hand. Instead, we think that we have at the time, the Park Chung-hee started to strong government, right? It's a strong state, and strong state started to distort the price. So what's the right price for economies? It's we have an invisible hand, so we have demand side and supply side, and then when they where these two met, we call this a right price. But if state intervene and this right price can be distort, and that's what South Korea did. And how we distort the price, that's actually the questions we have to ask. Anyway, this was the starting point. So we start with light industry. The main difference between South Korea and North Korea is the North Korea started to heavy industry, but South Korea started light industry. The commonality between the two is we both has very strong states, right? And government planned economy. That's the second thing that share the commonality between the two. Anyway, this is how we started. I mean, this is the average tariff ratio. So we talked about a lot of tariffs these days because of Trump. If we put tariff, that means let's say this pen, where's pen? So this pen is 101, like 100won in Korea. But if we put tariffs here, so if we put 50% tariffs, then this pen is 151, right? So 150원 in Korean. So if it become 150원, then the consumer should pay 150원, right? 151, not for the government, right? So many people actually people couldn't understand what's tariffs policy, but tariffs make the consumer poor because they will lose the opportunity to buy cheap products because of tariff rate. So the tariffs rate, why do government put tariffs? Because to protect their own domestic product. So let's say there is this is the pen that our country produced. This is $110, 110 won, so 110원. But this one was imported, and then that this pen is 101. So if this pen the if this pen quality of this pen, these pens are very similar, then you would definitely buy this pen because this pen is cheaper than this pen, right? 10 cents cheaper. So the consumer will choose this pen over this one, then this domestic product will go bankruptcy. So we'll lose for in competition. But if we put tariffs here, so if we become $150, 51, and this is still 110, you would buy this pen over this one because this one is cheaper, right? So this is how we could protect our products. So the Trump put a lot of tariff rate. It's because he wanted to protect the American product by doing so. But the thing is, it wasn't quite successful. That's the problem. But that's the one way to protect our domestic goods, right? So if you look at the tariffs rate, it was very high in 1962. It was 40%, and 1967 still 40%. 73 it lower, so 32%. 1975 32%. And then number of import restrictions. So you can actually, I mean, you can block some imported product. So let's say like coffee, for example. So you cannot import. Then you have to make. I mean, that's the one way of protecting the domestic goods as well. So if you block import from the very beginning, then you don't have to even compete, right? So if you look at the number of restrictions, so in 1981, the number of restrictions has been increased, but it was like more than 900. But 1967, it was 520, and it goes up. It has been increased. And total number of import items, if you look at the total number of import item, that means how many things you got imported. In terms of number, it was quite similar, but in 1981 things has been changed. In 1970 81, it's more than 7,000. So South Korea was quite not open until 1980. Actually, until 1990. So we will learn the president Kim Yong-sam later on. He was elected in 92, and then he pursued globalization, 세계화 policy. And then after he adopted the globalization, things has been changed. But before that, it was quite like this. And the import liberalization rate, if you look at the liberalization rate, it was 60%, but it goes down and it goes up in 1981. So 1981, the new president, of course, he was also dictator. We will learn. He is Chun Doo-hwan. And then he started to open its gate, but he didn't really open its gate. But things has been changed after that. So that was a policy that we has adopted. And South Korea, if you look at the South Korean the economy, it's very that the things you got is chaebol. Chaebol means big conglomerate. Big conglomerate. So if you look like you probably heard of Samsung, SK, Hynix, or Hyundai, Kia. These are big conglomerate. Big conglomerate rates means like, let's say Apple. Yeah, for example, Apple. It only focus on like computers or computer things, but Jables they do everything. So for instance, Hyundai they used to produce uh, semiconductor. I mean, they are producing cars, and they also had construction. So Jabil is doing everything. Like Samsung they produce semiconductor. Samsung also produce cell phone and all kinds of electronics. Samsung used to produce cars, but it went bankruptcy. And Samsung also had a Samsung CJ. CJ was one of the Samsungs, and CJ also producing like food. So Jabil is doing they uh, got involved all kinds of industries. So that's the Jabil thing. And the Jabil business was like that. It's how we had the Jabil. That's the point. When so let's say like government, we talked about like state-led government, state-led development. State-led development means like government started we have learned economic planning board last time. So we had the economic planning board, and economic planning board they set up the goals. So like for example, this year our economic growth rate should be like 15%, and then how many products we will produce this year, or how many product we will export. So we had a kind of goal, and then if you want to produce a certain product to export, then you can get some help from the government. That is just two. So access to low or no interest government loans. So that's the most important thing. So at the time, as soon as the Park Chung-hee got power, he nationalized all national bank. So all at the time there was no private bank whatsoever. So there was everything was national banks. That means if you wanted to start your business, the most important thing is money, right? You need money. How you could get money? You have to borrow from bank. But if the bank was owned by government, so bank was belong to the government, then the business should suck up to the government, right? So the government hold the money. That means government can do whatever they want to the business. So this is, I mean, the government, if you like, if you're interested in produce some product which is for export, then you can access to low or no interest government loans. And then sometimes you got like tax breaks. So like for instance, you have to pay tax like 10%, but since you produce export good, then you got like you can get discount, like tax discount like that. That's the benefit that you could get from the government at the time. So that means business was delegates of state power and the principal agent of state. That means the business should do whatever the state saying. That's the state-led development. That's the typical characteristics of development state. So when we talk about like development state, we talk about government, we talk about business, and we talk about labor. So the three things, three players, they have to play together, right? But in Korean case, usually like if you look at like Western case, then usually the business has a lot a lot of powers, but compared to government in Korea, the business was just agent of state. The state has a lot of power, and then business. But things will change over time because the business started to heavy in chemical industry, and then the things has been changed because business could get access to the money to the foreign bank, international bank. So we don't have to suck up to the government anymore. So the power of business has been grown up, and we also have to talk about, of course, labor too. The most important things we have to notice is the operation of labor during the Park Chung-hee and Chun Doo-hwan's regime. So many people actually, I mean, the new generation. So you guys are new generations, especially if you live in Korea, and then you got benefits out of this operation of labor era. So they work like 6 days a week. They work crazy. Even South Korea is one of the country that laborers work more than like 52 hours. That's quite long hours compared to OECD, other OECD country. So this is the picture. If you can see, like the farms provided dormitory, then usually like 12 people in one room. That's very normal thing. And then as you can see, they are actually minors. They are on age under 18. Usually at the time, if you are a woman, usually then the if you get like the education, then you should go to a factory. Usually they go to factory and then they work like that. So they're only like 15 years old or 16 years old, like that. It was very hard life, right? So, and this is demonstration, the laborers demonstrations. At the time, all kinds of laborers demonstration, not only the labor demonstration, but also other political demonstration was very restricted because of the harsh regimes. So it was dictatorships. So it was all illegal. So at the time, many laborers were participate in demonstration, but they couldn't succeed, or either they go to the jail like that. That was the oppression of labor. So labor union and assembly was totally illegal. That's why, I mean, it's a weird thing because we had two labor union in Korea. I mean, we had a lot, but the the most important, the most important thing is two labor union. But one is, I mean, but the thing is, usually like this labor union started to protect all kinds of laborers, but these days, labor unions were developed it only among regular workers. So these labor unions try to focus on to protect regular workers, but not irregular workers. So yeah, because of these dictatorships, South Korea could achieve economic development, but there are many caricatures, many caricature things like odd things. For instance, we had Jebel. Jebel is very rare thing, right? And we had this labor union, but labor union doesn't really work for human rights for the laborers. These are they are for regular workers. But the thing is, it's in Korea. The labor market is kind of weird because irregular workers they do not have any rights. But if you are regular workers, but it's really hard to get off, get fired compared to like U.S. or other countries. So the if you look at irregular workers side, then it's really easy to lay off. It's really, I mean, their salary is much lower than regular workers, and they couldn't get any like welfare policies. But if you're regular workers, the welfare that they get is very good, and it's really hard to lay off. So very flexible in irregular side. But if you go look at regular side, then it's really stiff. The labor market is really stiff. So very odd. How could it be possible? Because it was illegal. But as I say, things has been changed. Like business has grown up. Business become competitive enough to fight against international firms. And then when government started to industry, heavy and chemical industry, we need the skilled labor. The things have been changed because of the skilled labor. The skilled labor means it's really hard to displace. So let's say I can get a job anytime, maybe in coffee shop, because it's very easy to learn how to make coffee. It takes about like an hour, but it's really hard to replace if you're a doctor, right? Because to be a doctor, at least you have to go to medical school like 6 years, and then you have to intern and resident. Then it takes like 11 years. Then you need 11 years of training. That means you are skilled labor. So skilled, unskilled labor, major difference is how much time you need to train to work there, right? That's actually skilled labor. And then, like for instance, that this heavy and chemical industry, they started to organize very strong labor union, and things has been changed after that. So after the the government started to heavy and chemical industry, they quite they started to their human rights or the labor power has grown up, and then this had changed the power configurations among government, business, and the laborers. So at first, state has a lot of power, and business small power, and labor no power. But later on, business has similar power to that of government, And the labor is, of course, it's different depending on what kind of sectors you are in, but the labor power also has been grown some. And this is he's famous labor activist. He killed himself for the labor uh, human rights. His name John Taylor. So even we had a movie related to him. So he started to talk about like labor's right, and he also talked about like we have a legal right to protect ourselves, and then he demand labor's right, and that was actually stipulated in our law at the time even. So he talked about like the government should the business should protect based on the legal our law and regulations. That's what he wanted to demand. So he burned himself to demand the government. That was his life of John Tae. And then if you look at the working hour in Korea and other countries, so this the orange line is Japan, and the gray line is Finland. So in 1980s, Korean people work crazy, right? This is crazy. I think it's not it's a month. Let me calculate. So we work 52 hours usually, right? 52 hours. So we work usually like 208 hours a month. So it's a year, whole year. At the time, Korea, we work more than like 20 2,900 hours. That's crazy. In Japan was 20. Japan worked 2,100, and Finn is 2,800 hours. That's quite good. Let me calculate 2,800 hours. Um, it's 150 hours a month. So if we divide it into the hour, I mean the week, it's only 37.5 hour. So they work only 5 days. So that means you work only 5.5 7.5 hours. That's pretty good, right? I mean, we will never catch up thing. But anyways, this is annual working hours. If you compare, even in 2006, we work like crazy. Like, so we work more than 2,100 hours, but I think we work more than that. We work about like 210 at least. I mean, legally saying we can't work more than 208 hours a week, but there are a lot of exceptions. Like doctors, you can work more than that, or if you are cleaner, then you can work more than that, or if you're security, you can work more than that. So there's a lot of exceptions. And then when we talk about like economic growth, we always talk about the role of the U.S. and how could it be possible. So we put a lot of tariff rate. It was okay because U.S. was okay with that. And as I said, when the conservatives started to demonstrate, they hold one hand Korean flag, the other hand American flag. It's because of this. So the conservative thinks that because of the U.S. help, we could achieve the economic growth, and then we can't ignore the fact that U.S. played definitely a certain role. So U.S. aid Korea and Taiwan against communist aggression. So why U.S. did that then? That's a very important question to ask, because at the time, the Latin America did the same thing, but the U.S. wasn't okay with the Latin America um, because they don't care about Latin America at the time. So the U.S. was okay with South Koreans' high tariff rate and protectionism. That's protectionism, right? That's not openness. It was okay for the U.S. Protectionism because U.S. aid to Korea against communist aggression. So at the time, the most important thing was communist aggression. So even though South Korea put a lot of tariffs and they did tricks, right? But it was okay with the U.S. So U.S. The Japan did the same thing. So these two countries were exceptions for the U.S. And then the U.S. thinks that the South U.S. didn't never know. U.S. never knew that South Korea has developed this much, right? So now the South Korea become the kind of country, right, that the U.S. hate or U.S. care. But at the time, they never knew that South Korea grow up like this. Anyway, so U.S. supply uh, not only just food, but rehabilitation investment goods, provide a lot of techniques, technology transfer. That's the big deal. That's a big deal to for South Korea grow up like this. And then we had the military aid at the time. If you look at the 1960, 14% of GDP comes from the U.S. help. In 1961, 22.5%, 1962, 11% from the U.S. help. So I mean, if you compare this like during 1950s, so 1950, like it's most of GDP of Korea comes from the U.S. aid. So compared to that, the dependency rate uh, was quite lower than dependency rate becomes lower, a lot lower, but still it's high, right? 14%, 22.5%, 11%. And this is role of education. So how could South Korea reach economic growth? Number one, the U.S. help. Number two, the role of education. So South Korea, the most educated country in the world is South Korea. It's number one. I'm not that proud of it. I think it's too much. Like we don't like more than 70% of population goes to college. We don't really need to, right? But it doesn't really mean that South Korean people are smart. So but illiteracy rate, if you look at the illiteracy rate in 1955, it was 20%. If you look at like over 12, then 21% of people cannot read. Usually they are women. In 1960, it was 27.5%. Usually, like they are women. Women are at the time they do not educate women. But this territory rate is 80%. That's crazy, right? So 80% of South Korean people go to college. And the lower of education is important, matters a lot because of technology transfer possible. So we started with light industry and heavy industry, and then knowledge-based industry. How could it be possible? Because we had education, so we had enough personnel to take over the technology. So technology transfer could possible because of education. Launch new industry, and it was possible to launch a new industry. We had to have personnel, right? And it, education play a role to handle the crisis. And the as I said, after the heavy and chemical industry, the labor's power of labor has been grown, and then they organized this very strong labor union, and then it contributes to strong labor market as well. And if you look at the change of relationship between state and business, so the Jebel growing influence of Jebel, so Jebel business has been grow up, that they are competitive enough to fight against the international market. And Jebel uh, pursue economic and financial liberalization. So the Jebel was only for the domestic market, but as time goes by, they could fight against the international market. So they started to conduct a project in overseas. So in 1994, about 2,650 projects were held in overseas. So they don't really need the money from the government. So that means they can access to credit without state help. So, but when they grow up, they couldn't do anything. without state, but since they had enough competitiveness, they could get access from from the from international society. And so, as I said, heavy and chemical industry, when the government started to launch heavy and chemical industry, the, the labor becomes stronger because the heavy and chemical industry need skilled labor rather than unskilled labor. Skilled labor means it's hard to replace. That means they can demand their labor rights from government. So strong labor. And in 1987 to 1989, 7,100 labor dispute, and there was a strong labor union as well. So the labor dispute was illegal, but it became legal after that. So after 1987 is the most important year in Korean history because there was a democratization in Korea. And this is strong labor was possible, as I said, because of education. So we had two labor unions. So one is Federation of Korea Trade Unions, 한국노총. That is peak association. So it doesn't really talk about the it doesn't really protect the labor's right, but Korean Confederation Trade Union is organized by the laborers, and then it's very strong labor union. And if we summarize this, the most important thing that I wanted to emphasize throughout this lecture is state control of finance and state planning. These two. So state-led development, and we call this development state. So development state could possible during the Park Chung-hee regime because Park Chung-hee regime has the state has a lot strong power than anything else. And then Park Chung-hee did the really bad things in terms of political side. He was dictator. He did really bad things to the people, but still he contribute in a certain way definitely because of this economic growth. And the Korea could develop by oppressing the labor. So the wage was quite low, quite a long time, even though South Korea become rich. So the 재벌 got a lot of money because of this oppression of labor. So the for a long time, the laborers didn't have any power to negotiate or to demand their labor's right to the government. And then we can't ignore the role of the U.S. Right? The U.S. because of the U.S. help, we could we could achieve this economic growth. So developmental states, South Korea's developmental states, so government control over banking system. So it nationalized all kind of banking systems. The banks were nationalized in Korea. Park Chung-hee during the Park Chung-hee, and central bank was greatly restricted by MOF, the Ministry of Finance. So Ministry of Finance, but the other word, Economic Planning Board. And capital from foreign source controlled by government. So it was impossible that that firms go abroad to get the money. But as soon as it has comparative enough, it could possible. And it talks about that it has very significant implications to the Westerners. The number one, the laissez-faire policy is wrong from South Korean's perspective because we did this, we distort the price, right? And then we did export oriented policy, right? And then we maximize export but not import, right? But so laissez-faire policy, autarkic trade policy, both of them we laugh at it, right? Because we do not thinks that laissez-faire policy is enough for economic growth, but at the same time, we think that the autarkic trade policy is wrong too. So we come up with maximize export but minimize import. That's very rare kind of policy. That's export oriented policy, and then we actually proved that this was right. Right. And we have a government investment. So government did everything. So economic export oriented policy and plan oriented development project. That's, as I said, North Korea did the same thing, right? So South Korea did the same thing, but the difference between the two, that of course we had the incentive, so we give the incentive that we, because we are capitalism, but the same thing is the planned oriented government, planned oriented development project by government, right? And then we did the based on sectoral industrial policy. So we started with like textile, light industries, and later on so on and so on like that. The share of textile and clothing export in South Korea GNP grew from like 1.8% in mid 1950s, and 3% and 70.7% in 1970s. So like that. So but we completely lost the competitiveness in light industry to China or Vietnam. But when we started to light industry like that because of cheap labor. We could develop like this because we only have cheap labors, as I said. So, I mean, I did it really fast, but that's actually about it. I mean, the most important things, I think I mentioned the most important things to understand the South Korean economic development. I mean, Park Chung-hee is kind of the old generation. He's kind of nostalgia. So people like miss him a lot, and respect a lot because of his economics. During his term, he did really bad things in terms of politics, but at least he did good things. So yeah, it's about South Korean economic development, and we will start me after the Park Chung-hee was killed, and then the new government came up. That's Chun Doo-hwan's regime. We will definitely cover that, and then I will see you on next Thursday. That's the May 8th. I will see you later. Bye. Enjoy this video.